Good afternoon, everybody. Here we are back with the second half of day two of Agile Network India May 2021 events. I welcome you all once again. And now we are moving on with our next session talk from Delhi chapter, where we will discuss about how to mess up a product backlog. We have Arunima Shekhar, who is a product manager at Trigen Technologies, sharing her insights around this topic. Before we begin with the session, let me thank our founding sponsor, Innovation Roots. It is a leading consulting and training service provider, helping organizations to achieve business agility and beyond. It is one of the leaders and pioneers of niche publishing services and well known for content collaboration with global thought leaders, authors, and creators. You can find out more details at www.innovationroots.com. We are also happy to have Jile as one of the sponsors for the community. It is a product offering from Tata Consultancy Services Limited. It is a purely cloud-based enterprise agile planning tool along with DevOps capabilities. Enterprises can use Jile to adopt agile practices or scale across multiple Scrum and Kanban teams using enterprise scaling frameworks such as SAFe, Disciplined Agile, LESS, and more. You can try out Jile for free for up to 20 users for 30 days by signing up at jile.io, or you can reach out to us for any inquiries or if you wish to set up an exclusive product demo. Check out the Jile page on Agile Network India website for more information. The link is available in the chat box. And with that, I would like to call upon Srijit NT, who is going to facilitate this session, and Arunima on the mic and webcam. Over to you both.
Thanks, Nopur. So, good afternoon, everyone. So, managing the requirement, be it explicit or implicit, paves the way for any product success. So, today we have our esteemed speaker, Arunima Shekhar, who is the product manager from Trigen Technologies, who is going to present topic. How to mess up a product backlog will be quite interesting for us to listen and learn. Arunima, welcome to the presentation.
Thank you, Srijit, and thank you, Nupur, for kicking off this session. So I'll very quickly dive into our session itself. So a quick introduction about myself. I'm Arunima Shekhar. I'm a product manager at Trigen Technologies. It's a full stack digital engineering company. In my 15 plus years of experience, I have donned various hats in both technology and the creative arts in different roles as a founder, product manager, product owner, subject matter expert, and as well as an author. Today, I'm here to talk about how we can mess up a product backlog. To quickly talk about how we are going to end up with a product backlog that's a total mess. It does sound ironical, I'm sure, but yeah, we are going to dive in and see how that becomes true. There are a few basic assumptions when we do this session, is that the audience here is familiar with the concept of a product backlog, as well as some of the basic concepts of product backlog management and agile development methodology. While most of us start a project with perfectly drafted visions and a well-organized product backlog, it often starts resembling a messed up stationery drawer a couple of sprints down the line. So you know the stuff you want is in the backlog somewhere, but it's a pain to find it. So in this talk today, we will go over what the ideal product backlog looks like, its characteristics. The session will be broken into two parts. In the first part, we will deep dive into the actions that are likely to introduce chaos into a product backlog. And this is going to be done through a case study of one of the implementations that Trigen itself has done. And the second part of the session will be dedicated to see how, obviously, because we don't want to run a project with a messed up product backlog, we will see what steps we can take to proactively avoid it, and finally see how a well-managed product backlog can actually add a lot of business value. So let's quickly dive into the session with this, with a small activity. So before we actually get into the nitty-gritties of the product backlog, let's just flex our brains and warm it up a little. Just quickly think about which was the last project where you felt at the end of a project, that the product backlog could have been managed better. It was just too chaotic and it could have been managed better. And then take 30 seconds, note that down, and also think about one item, the one most important thing which in retrospect you felt should have been different. And yes, if there are multiple such product backlogs you can think of, you're welcome to think of the most chaotic one. And as we go along, we will see talk of steps that you can think and apply to that backlog and see if it could have been managed better. So let's quickly take 30 seconds as I talk and note this down or make a mental note of it. You don't have to put it into chat. You can just put it, write it down on a piece of paper. Now, as you now just keep what you have noted for reference, and we will use it during the session. So now, when you thought back to that product backlog, maybe this was how that product backlog was looking at the start of the project. Typically, all product backlogs start off looking very organized and clean. This backlog is the sample from a learning management system that Srijan built for one of our clients, which is a Fortune 500 company in the luxury beauty industry. As you can see, all epics are in place. User stories have followed the who, what, and why, or the persona action result template. All stories were all tasked, subtasked, prioritized, mapped to their respective epics for tracking purpose. And also all the epics we had tried to map them to the business initiatives or the, at a high level, what we call the features. So now as the project proceeded, and this is a quick case study slide, and we're going to come back to it. So as the project proceeded, the backlog started taking a more dreaded state. 2 sprints down the line, it had started looking like this. So this is a snapshot of an epic from the same backlog after 2 sprints of development were completed. So what do we see here? We see that new epics were added along the way, some of which were not even made up of related stories and could not directly be mapped to directly to a business value or to a certain initiative. Tickets were created by different people in the team, as always, developers, testing team members, in addition to obviously the BA and the product owner who were putting in the stories, which meant that they may or may not have adequate information. And in our case, actually, some of them were created by team members and did not have adequate information. Some of them were left unprioritized or flagged for unknown reasons. As you can see, they're flagged. Sometimes they were not classified correctly. So you can see here that there is something called an enable GIF on page load, which is logged as a bug, which could very well actually have been a task or a story in itself. So what is it that changed in between? So when you think of it, we would probably come up with answers, and this is what our team also did. We came up with answers like, there were a lot of feedback that came in for features already developed. There were lots of additions of bugs being made by all the team members into the backlog, and there were also new features that came in from the stakeholders. The stakeholders, obviously, in our case, it was a client, but it could very well be an internal stakeholder also. So, and this obviously was happening sprint on sprint, and it was creating a chaos in the product backlog. So in any project, this is expected. Sprint on sprint, this would build up, and you could have a large product backlog 2 or 3 sprints down the line. So was it these things that led to the chaos? Actually, no. Because all of these things are what characterizes an agile sprint. And a product backlog is actually meant to handle all of these. What we did, when 2 sprints down our project, we realized the project, the product backlog was looking more and more unmanageable, we did a retrospective to understand where we were going wrong, to analyze that. And what we found that we were actually focusing on the wrong questions. We were focusing on what we were doing, what we were adding to the backlog. When we shifted the focus away from what we were doing to how we were putting in items into the backlog, that shift in questioning our technique gave us, it helped make a very big difference. So what is it that we did when we shifted this focus? So the first thing that we focused on was how we were writing our product backlog. How is it that the content of the product backlog was being created? How detailed were the acceptance criteria and descriptions for each story? Did we add details till the point that it actually started looking ridiculous? Did tasks have descriptions and technical details for the person to understand what needed to be done? Did bugs have enough details and steps to reproduce? We found that actually the answers to a lot of these questions was no. Tickets were added to the product backlog by different team members, tasks and subtasks by the tech leads and the developers, bugs by the quality analysts and the UAT or the user acceptance testing team. In addition to obviously the user stories which were being added by the business analysts and the product owners. Insufficient details meant that a lot of the time actually was being spent during these grooming calls, understanding what needed to be done in the ticket. And often during implementation, that ticket would be broken down into smaller ones. And again, since they lacked enough details, they would be stuck waiting to be discussed. So what the result of this was that there was always a spillover in the current sprint, and that was leading to a pile up in consequent sprints. So this actually was introducing sprint on sprint chaos into the backlog. So what did we do? There were some very small things that we did to counter this. We introduced 2 checkpoints in our backlog management process. One was to update the definition of ready to include tasks and bugs in addition to user stories. Often, the user stories are written by the business analyst, and the whole focus of our grooming sessions lies on the grooming of user stories. But the tasks and subtasks, as well as the bugs, they actually require equal amount of descriptions and steps to reproduce and technical detailing as much as stories do, and sometimes more, because that's something that your team is working on day. So when we added this step, we realized that all the tickets were moved to ready state only when sufficient details were being added to it. And details were also verified by the product owner or the business analyst along with the tech analyst to make sure that the tasks, subtasks, bugs, everything had enough detailing both for implementation as well as for testing purposes. Second thing that we did was that the team was instructed to not pick up any tickets that moved into their lane if there was no completion comments added by the previous assignee. The result of these checkpoints was that the number of spillovers reduced, indirectly keeping the backlog clean for the next sprint. So from the case study, this was the first how that we tackled. How was the content of the product backlog being added? Now, before we move to the next item we learned from our retrospective, again, let's just do a quick exercise. And this is a thing in which I need the audience to participate as well. Is that, let's say you were going to be stranded on a deserted island and you were allowed to bring one of these 8 objects with you. So what is it that you would choose? Take a minute. I'll again pause for 30 seconds. Take a minute to decide, and you can write your responses in the comments with at least one reason on why you have chosen that object. And don't worry, the comments are visible only to me and I think to our organizers. So if you don't want it, I will not read it out with your name. Okay. Very interesting inputs coming in. So let me read out a few of the comments that I'm getting here. So there's water bottle, which quite a few people are writing in. There's a boat, and a lot of people again are writing boat. I have one person who has said a mobile, and one person who has said hammock, which would be very interesting if you're on a deserted island. So what is it that we did? Thank you for the participation. I'm so happy I got so many comments here. So sorry, what is it that we did just now? What is it that we all did just now? We did what we do on a daily basis as part of our agile teams. So now if you were to replace these objects with feature sets that you have, what you actually did was mentally calculated priorities. That's why a lot of people said water bottles and boats. You thought through dependencies and the risks of picking one object over the other, right? Maybe you might have thought of a mobile phone so that you could contact the outer world so long as the battery lasts, right? But whenever you have prioritized, you have said you would want to take something that is immediately of highest priority for you. So while we all, so this is the next step actually that we found was messing up our product backlog. Not whether we were doing a prioritization or not, but actually how we were prioritizing the tickets and how frequently. So while we all get sign-offs on bug severities and turnaround times, a similar exercise for priorities may or may not be done. Which means that what happens as a consequence is that different people interpret priorities differently. So critical, important, low, or normal may mean different things to different people. So they would assign tickets they create using their own benchmarks, right? That led us to the next how. How have key stakeholders contributed towards the prioritization exercise? Did every stakeholder actually get to voice their opinion? Ensuring that every stakeholder got a say in the prioritization ensured that priorities were not changed halfway through the sprint, leading to more and more spillovers. And obviously the burn down chart looks wonky if somebody starts saying in the middle of a sprint that no, you need to scope in this item because it's high priority for us. Also remember that prioritization is a continuous exercise because priorities may change throughout the life cycle of a project. Most teams, including ours, do a prioritization upfront, right in the beginning, and once they have assigned a priority, we assume the same priority till the ticket is actually done. This might actually lead to unpleasant surprises in some cases, and in our case, cause the team to actually abandon a few tickets halfway through. That's not a good place to be in, since these unfinished tickets will again sort of make a mess in the backlog, right? Because you don't know what status they have been completed with. Now think back to the exercise that we just did. Most of us have deprioritized the laptop, or maybe in some cases the phone also, because we could not take a charger along. Similarly, one would avoid prioritizing tickets that have critical dependencies or risk associated with them. To ensure prioritization mistakes were not done anymore, we added 3 checkpoints into the backlog grooming process. One was that the list of priorities for user stories, tasks, and bugs, along with the expectations, were signed off as part of the discovery deliverables and before the team moved the tickets into their to-do lanes. Before the tickets were picked up into development, we created a priority matrix to ensure everybody was aligned and had the same understanding of priority levels. The second thing was that at each grooming session, we would revisit the priorities for all open tickets in the backlog, giving the chance to capture any changed priorities. Yes, it sounds tedious, but that would like that half an hour extra spent during grooming to reprioritize all tickets actually paid off in the end. Also, high priority tickets that had associated dependencies or blockers or risks were tracked separately using a RAID log in the daily Scrum meetings and in regular checkpoints with the key stakeholders. Once we put in these checkpoints, we realized that we managed to bring down the percentage of unfinished tickets or abandoned tickets, and also actually in the process improve the customer's happiness quotient, since the regular prioritization exercise gave them it gave them a refresher as well as a conviction that we were always on the same page with them with respect to the priorities. So now this was the second item. So prioritization, how we were doing the prioritization and not whether we were doing a prioritization, was the second thing that we handled. The third thing was how we were grooming the product backlog. So obviously, like all teams, we were doing the product backlog. And actually, we thought we were doing a good job of grooming the backlog because we had a cadence set up to groom the backlog with the client product owner, the business stakeholders, then the internal teams. Again, we realized what we were focusing on was what we were doing, that we were grooming it. But when we started asking ourselves, how were we grooming the product backlog? The responses actually opened up a very new vista for us. How did we discuss the product backlog? Did we go over it word by word with all stakeholders? How were the attendees at these grooming sessions responding? Did they ask questions and did they absorb what we were talking them, or was it more of a monologue than a dialogue? And also, was everyone who would be involved in UAT represented at the grooming calls? So because not everyone interprets statements the same way. So scenarios and acceptance criteria may be interpreted differently by different stakeholders. And when the developer starts writing code, or the QA starts testing, or the product owner starts doing the UAT, this difference in understanding would lead to more confusion, because somebody might log a bug which is not actually a bug, or somebody might create a feedback or change requests which were never discussed. And as a consequence, more change requests will turn up later. So going over every story in detail right at the beginning of the sprint might actually sound overkill, because you're reading through every single story and every single description, but it pays off later. We found that actually it made a huge difference on how the client understood the stories. And we've adopted this practice multiple times in other projects, internal as well as external, after this. And we've actually always, and this technique has always met with a very positive response. Equally important is to make sure that all key stakeholders have understood the story beforehand, either directly during the grooming calls or indirectly via a sign-off procedure. So when I say all key stakeholders, it means everybody, whether it is your design team, your development team, the product team, the content team, or maybe even the business teams. Anybody who would be later involved in the signing off for features and during launch activity should be aligned over the backlog, because that is your single source of truth. So now this basically these checkpoints that we did, again, to make sure that we were effectively grooming the product backlog and not just doing it as a checkpoint in the agile process. The first was to add a new state in the workflow for a sign off. So this was added prior to like a ready to play kind of a state where the developers would pick up. And this was owned by the product owner, who would ensure that all issues that were moved into sign-off state were discussed in detail with all the stakeholders, and then only moved to ready. The second was to break down the grooming sessions into smaller chunks of not more than 2 hours each. Avoiding these long grooming sessions actually allowed the sessions to be more participative, and also allowed actually the participants to be more focused. We also made sure that these sessions were participative by asking open-ended questions and asking for opinions, not to the audience at large, the attendees at large, but by directly addressing the specific people by name. Very small change, but made a very big difference. So once we put in all of these three, we fixed these three hows, we found that our stories were getting more and more descriptive, and a sample story from like this new state backlog is added here as an example. As you can see, it is detailed to the minutest level, even stating very, very obvious things like, it should open on a new tab or a same tab. It incorporates comments from all different stakeholders, including design, content, and technical teams. Of course, this is a story very specific to the case study we were discussing earlier. and the details and the stakeholders and the inputs might vary from project to project. So the backlog we messed up was set right by bringing in a few process adjustments and making changes in how we were doing things. Uh, a quick recap, like how are we doing a good product backlog? Not something I'm saying, something that Roman Pichler has said. But yes, this does help, and when actually implemented word by word, this technique does lead to a very smooth running product backlog. But there are a few things that you can actually do right at the start. So that is the part one of our session. The part two of our session is about what is it that you can do right at the start to give that edge to your product backlog, so that the product backlog will not just be an operational artifact that you create, but actually go beyond that and add business value to your project or account. So let's again do a very small activity. We're going to pause, and there was a product backlog in the beginning of our session today. We all thought about a product backlog. Now, the one that was a mess. Now just try. This is a chart which is a template for a vision statement. Let's try and fill this chart in for that product. Again, you don't have to share it with me. Wherever you have made a note on paper, just fill this in. Think about these questions. Do you know why the product was being built or the project was being executed? What was the need of kickstarting that? The second, what was the long-term goal or the vision for that product, or what was it that the project was aimed at? Then think about how did you develop it? Do you know what strategy was used? Was it an MTP, an MVP? What was the tech stack decisions? What were the tech stack decisions? And why were those tech stack decisions taken? And then lastly, and most importantly, what was its business value? What return was business targeting when it invested money into that effort? And for those who may not have thought of a reference project, you can pick up the enterprise LMS case study, which I'm just bringing up here. The problem statement, statement here is that of beauty advisors who are working in the firm globally and who need a platform to learn about the brand's product and its services. And since these beauty advisors frequently change locations, sometimes across continents, the platform should be able to adapt to their changing training needs. So just think about this very quickly and try to fill in this particular vision statement. Again, we'll pause for 30 seconds and I'm going to give you some time to just think about this and fill it in. You're welcome to ask anything, put the questions in the comments, and we can definitely take up the questions later in case you're at a loss about what is to be done in this. Okay, let's move 30 seconds up. So now here is the sample of the vision statement we created for the case study that was displayed in the above slide. The need was very clearly identified and the end goal was clearly defined. And note the end goal, since we are going to come back to it in a later slide, that the idea of that platform was to support different kinds of content and gamify learning for the beauty advisors. At the same time, it was allowing their trainers to track how the reportees are performing. That was the end goal of that application on the platform that was being created. Now, what we did just now, and of course we had we had a value proposition which was very clearly identified, that we improve the customer satisfaction and drive better sales out of it with an X percentage increase, can't diverge the X percentage here. And also the second very key value proposition that we had was making sure that the trainers, the training content developers are making very informed decision about what kind of content they put out, rather than just putting out videos on Vimeo, which is what the earlier technique of training their beauty advisors was. So what you did just now was actually step back from thinking about the product backlog only, which is a more operational artifact, and instead you thought about the larger picture of the why. Why were you building what you were building? Because this why is what will drive the decisions that you make on the product backlog. An alternate and of course more detailed way of thinking about the whys is the product canvas. Here, note the items in bold. These are very critical in defining the scope of the project and the success of the project, because these two items, often one of the challenges that we face is, like we say, there's a scope creep that happens, there's a change management, it's upsetting our change management. Defining very clearly what is our audience and what is the key metrics we are going to actually track at the end of the project, and what is the purpose of the product that we are building, will help us manage the change much better. So creating this vision statement and the product canvas early in the project, preferably before the start of development, allows us to stay focused and make informed decisions on what really matters within our product backlog. It also aids in the alignment of all the different teams, the development team, the product team, and the business team early on in the project about what we are working towards. And it helps all the teams stay aligned and not lose focus of the larger picture. Once you have these artifacts in place, you're able to define your initiatives and epics to fulfill the intent stated within them. Moving forward, this is the purpose. Like we covered now what is actually the purpose of this product canvas and the product vision statement. But one of the this is a commonly used template that you may have actually come across or even used while defining epics. One of the key things that we did while defining the epics after creating the vision and the product canvas was not just create the epics with the descriptions, but also focus on the business outcomes and the leading indicators. The business outcome defines the anticipated qualitative and quantitative benefits, while the leading indicators defines early measures that will help predict the business outcomes. In our case, we found that when we started essentially quantifying our epics with these two parameters, we could ensure that every work piece delivered was always aligned with the larger objective, always had a clear quantifiable objective. This was of great help in operationalizing the product backlog for us. It helped us manage change better. So these are like the values that, like the value we defined out of defining the business value. So it helped us manage change better, and since changes and feedback could be classified now in terms of how important they were to the overall vision, we could make sure that we were doing away with the fluff, the unwanted changes, and just focused on the changes which were contributing to that larger goal. It also helped us build a long-term roadmap spanning nearly a year right at the outset, since we could prioritize better. We knew not just what we were going to be doing in the next sprint or the next couple of sprints or next month, but we also knew what would be the shape of the backlog 6 months down the line, so that the product vision could be fulfilled. And most importantly, it helped us identify potential new business. A very interesting case instance that happened out of our case study that I just mentioned is, for instance, when these learners started engaging with the platform, their managers wanted to not just see their reporting data of how they're engaging with the content, but also influence how their reportees were performing. So which meant that this actually, when we dive deeper, this allowed us to actually explore the possibility of creating an altogether new platform, which was meant for only managers. Different persona altogether. If you look back at the product canvas, the persona was totally different now. But now it was targeting purely managers, and this platform would enable the managers to be involved in their employees' learning using evaluations and recommendations. So they could do course recommendations, they could recommend offline trainings, and make sure that they could actually be an active part of their employees' learnings. And most important thing out of all of these, it helped us actually come up with a repeatable model that we could apply to more projects, both within the portfolio and without. The LMS, because then we were able to take that LMS under the same umbrella using the same model. So summarizing, just not just maintaining our backlog, but also the business value derivation that we did, and the vision and the canvas definition that we did early on, streamline the operations much more. So it had not just an indirect, but a very direct impact on how well the backlog phased out. So a well-maintained backlog, just sort of wrapping it, three main factors. One, how much stakeholder involvement do you have in your product backlog? How well do you manage the backlog grooming? And how well does the backlog fit in with the overall project objectives? And all the artifacts that we have defined here in today's call, in today's session, will actually contribute towards making sure that the backlog is really not just a piece, not just an artifact that you're creating for a day-to-day operations, but has really enough business value to contribute to the overall project success. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions. And in case you are new to Agile and you have any questions for me, you can reach out to me. These are my credentials. You can reach out to me on email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And we could take up questions here. So back to you, Srinit.
Yeah, thanks, Arima. This was nicely put, well articulated. So I think these concepts even we can apply in the service delivery if we look from the bringing the product point of view. Very nicely put. So everyone, please put the questions. In the meantime, one question I have, Arima. So you mentioned about the value delivery, right? Any techniques you would like to suggest in a product environment for explaining the value to the business?
Sorry, Srijit, you just cut off in between. So can you please repeat your question?
Any value identification techniques you would like to mention?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that really helps is if you are able to directly map whatever you are delivering in terms of the features of an application to a business ROI. Right. So, for instance, in our let me just take the example of the case study I just presented. So, in our case, the whole objective of creating an LMS was because the client was keen to improve their revenue from sales, and that meant that that actually was this straightforward ROI that they were looking for while investing into this application. So what we did was set up like a funnel to track with data, give them a very clear data picture about how many users they're engaging, how their learning curve was improving month after month, and how many more sales were they able to manage. So that could show a direct setting up that conversion funnel helped us to directly map the business impact or the revenue impact of the features that we were delivering.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, we have some questions coming. Priyank has a question. When do you say PO is not efficient? What are the indicators when we know PO is not doing a efficient job?
Okay,
Any
that's
thoughts?
a very tricky question. I'm going to try to answer that as diplomatically as I can. So, see, I would say of course, there are a few indicators that will tell you right at the outset that the PO needs some feed forward to help them do the jobs better, right? When you see that, one of the indicators that we always look at is how are the burn downs, basically, not just the sprint burn downs, which tell you how the story points are burning down, but the epic burn downs. You see how the progress of each epic over sprints is going. See whether the epic, so when you're mapping out, charting out the epics, you are you are able to see that the you would have a start date and end date in mind, right? And you would want to make sure that because when you're charting out the epic, you have thought about why you have thought of you have a rationale behind putting that end date. So you want to make sure that there is some milestone that needs to be hit when that epic burn down. And if you're seeing that the burn down is not moving the way it should, the epic is not burning down, then you will have to see, you can figure out that somebody is not doing a good job. Now, specifically, how do you know that a PO is not doing a good job? There are some very basic measures you can take a look at, like how are the stories being written, right? This comes to like one of the points I discussed in the session, right? How detailed are the stories? There are, and I have seen it in my own experience while reviewing product backlogs, right? There are times when even the basic principle about who does what, does why is not followed, right? The actors are going to be missing, the persona is missing, or maybe the scenarios are missing, right? When you know that's a short way to failure, right? Because this would mean that there are repeated discussions that will be needed to actually clarify what needs to be done in every story. So one indicator that a PO is not doing a job good enough is the fact you can take a look at the product backlog itself and see how the stories and how descriptive the stories are written. That is, so one was the burn down, the second is the how the backlog is, the third very indirect indicator which I have personally encountered many times in product in BAs which I've groomed, is see the number of discussions that the development team needs with the BA or the PO, right? That will tell you whether the PO is doing a good job or not. Because ideally, if the stories are well documented, if all the details of the product backlog has been groomed and maintained well, the team should not need repeated conversations with the PO to understand what has to be done in the story. Yes, they may need, in case priorities change, then the PO can come back saying, okay, the priority for this ticket has changed and let's discuss this because we haven't discussed this before. But if that happens, if there are repeated discussions for even groomed tickets, means the story was not well written enough. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think nicely put. Thank you.
Sure.
So we have a question from Divakar. It's a scenario he has mentioned here. So sometimes at the starting, we do not know which team is going to do the user acceptance testing. And later we found that UAT users have different perspective about the product. While they are testing as a whole, they see some misunderstanding. In this case, we face issue and there may be some of the misunderstanding coming and expectations not clear. So how do we tackle this kind of scenarios?
Okay, so typically if you're following an agile model, the UAT would go parallel to sprints. So I'm not sure what we mean by the face issues at the end. So I'm assuming you mean the end of the sprint, where every story is not being UAT'd as and when they move into the UAT lane in a sprint. But if we were to tackle the scenario of, let's say, not knowing who the UAT team is, I think this is a push from both sides. One is, like we said, at the grooming meeting for a particular sprint, it is important that all the UAT stakeholders are at least represented. They may not be there in person, but they have to be represented. And at this time, whether it is your internal product, so you belong to a product development company and developing products for internal purpose, or whether you're a service oriented company where you're developing it for the clients. In both cases, the UAT for that sprint, there should be a push from the team side, also from the PO side, that let's discuss. And in case there are obviously because they have not been at the grooming sessions, and like we already discussed, they will have a different perspective about the about the story being written and what the outcome of it should be. In that case, there are bound to be CRs, and we need to then put in place a CR management process where we are very clear about how the CRs are going to be handled. They either get handled in the next sprint or in the sprint after whatever you have started right now. But yes, aligning the UAT users right upfront is important, because I'm sure like you would always know who your UAT users are going to be, or at least you can always go back to your stakeholders and ask the question, right? Sometimes there are scenarios where, let's say, a content team or a design team is going to do UAT, they are going to upload content, but they may not be able to be available for the grooming session. In that scenario, those changes that come in, or they might give back enhancements, they can always be taken up in a later sprint, where you would obviously tell your stakeholders that these are coming in late and we have to move it. So you would obviously have like that kind of a change management process put in place.
Okay, thank you. So stakeholder management and communication always critical.
Absolutely critical, because you agile means you are doing UAT parallelly. It's not waterfall where you will do it in the end.
Good one. So we have one more question from Prashant. We have a lot of good questions coming. So as a product owner, can you please tell one example which was most challenging situation you faced and how you were able to tackle it? So
Okay,
good questions coming in.
that's a very, very good question actually. And okay, so one of the most challenging situations that I have faced, at least as a product owner, was for um, was for a project where the client kept pushing the go live date. It was a time box, so it was not a TNM model project. It was a time box project, but the client refused to go live on the scheduled launch date because they said that there was a last minute stakeholder change, and the new stakeholders that came in, they said we are not going to go live till the entire product backlog is cleared off. So that was a very hard decision for us, where we said that we have a certain sign off, and because now the stakeholders had changed, for us it was a very tricky situation, because the new stakeholders brought in a lot of more infrastructure related requirements, highly technical requirements. So for us, we had to pivot the nature of the product backlog almost like a sprint before launch. So that for us was, for me personally, that was one of the most challenging situations, because the tech stack that they brought in halfway through, nearly, when this project was 75% complete, the tech stack they brought in was totally new to me, and almost only one person on the team actually knew how to work with that tech stack. So it literally involved for me as a product owner to study up over the entire weekend what that new tech stack meant, so that, and because it was a highly technical twist to the pivot to the project, I had to read up over the weekend about the new tech stack and be able to have a new product backlog up and ready by Monday morning London time, so that the team could start working on it. So I think for me, that pivot, that project in which we had this tech pivot all of a sudden very close to launch, was the most challenging one.
Okay, nice. So just maybe we have 1 minute, maybe one more question we have from Swati Jain. This would be very well connected to what Prashant asked. How to handle the spikes? For example, you mentioned about a tech stack and dealing. So how to handle anything from your experience, want to share?
So one of the things that really works well if there are tech spikes are, there are of course there are some places. It depends a lot on what kind of spike we are talking of. So sometimes all of like the stakeholder change might bring in a whole new set of requirements. There might be at times where right at the towards the fag end of the project, you might get a lot of requirements. In those cases, the prioritization exercise becomes very important. So you go back to the board, prioritize with them, and we actually did a storyboarding exercise on one of these projects where that kind of a change happened, where towards the end we got a whole new set of requirements. The whole design changed of what we were developing. So we had to go back to the storyboard, and we actually did a storyboard exercise with the team, saying with all the stakeholders, saying let's now prioritize what is most critical for us to have this MVP out, without which we know that we cannot. So this storyboarding exercise is always very useful when we actually have to handle such spikes, because it allows you to sort of focus on what is the most important priority, and then be able to put the other items, the journeys which are most important for you, cover those, and deprioritize the rest of them.
Okay. So planning and prioritization.
Planning,
Important.
prioritization, and storyboarding, all three of them go really well hand in hand. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Very insightful session. And yep, we are just crossing the time, and appreciate everyone joining and participating and contributing. It was very insightful, everyone.
Thank you so much.